Welcome to the Therapist Thrival Guide. My name is Miranda, and this is Lucas. And today we are talking about politics and political anxiety because, man, it's an election year, and I think people on both sides are feeling it. And it's coming up in so many different ways and in therapy sessions. And Lucas here he's like in charge of the CEU program here at Ellie. And so he recently put on a CEU about politics. And I messaged you afterwards and I was like, okay, when are you coming on the podcast so we can talk about this more? So you are someone who's like always been interested in this topic.
Well, not true.
Really?
Up until I was like 23, 24, I couldn't have told you a single thing about politics or government. Had not the slightest interest whatsoever, paid zero attention.
What changed then?
Well, I mean, it was 2016.
Oh, sure.
You know,
I think you just aged yourself. You just said you were 25 in 2016.
I think I might have been, oh gosh, I'm 36 years old right now today in this moment.
What?
Yeah, I'm 36.
Your birthday's today?
No.
Oh.
But like, that's how old I am right now. I mean, and another, like nobody talks about this. It's like we all know that is something we live with and like it's in the air, especially now. But it's that's why nobody else is here. It's just you and me.
I mean, I didn't try to get a guest for this
well,
one.
Who would we have gotten anyway?
I don't know.
I would have loved to get like a raging liberal and a MAGA in here.
Oh, yeah. No.
Because that's what I'm interested in. Like I love facilitating that discourse, you know, and having people, you know, I mean, ultimately, not necessarily find common ground, but, you know, it's like just...
Have a respectful conversation.
Yeah, it's like come to reclaim the humanity, you know, that you've robbed this other political party of. And so, like, yeah, I knew nothing about politics. Like, I'm pretty sure my parents were more conservative, but they never talked out loud about politics, you know? So, like, and the only reason I suspect they were conservative was because one year for my dad's birthday, I got him Fahrenheit 9/11, which was a Michael Moore documentary. And then, like, 6 years later...
Isn't that a book, too?
I think Fahrenheit
it's a different
something
one.
Else.
Yeah, okay.
So that's like he did a play off of that.
Got it.
For 9/11. And then like 6 years later, I saw that it was still in it's plastic.
Oh, no.
So like I said to my older brother, I was like, oh, Dad never watched this. And he was like, of course he didn't. And I was like, that's a Michael Moore documentary. But in 2016, and like I never watched the news. You know, I didn't really understand why people did. But 2016, like Donald Trump got the presidential... or he got the bid for the GOP. And so like, I was like, at the very least, this is interesting.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's like, we know who Donald Trump is. Like he had lived in the spotlight, you know? And so the fact that one, you know, he was kind of the first celebrity to run for office since Reagan.
Okay. I was going to say Reagan.
Yeah. Since Reagan. And, you know, like it was, and then it was Hillary, you know, the first woman to get the primary party top candidate. So I started paying attention and just like started paying way too much attention. Like I became obsessed with it. Like read a ton of political philosophy, U.S. history, world history, and, you know, just making sense of it through like cybernetics and a lot of the systemic frameworks that I was already living in as a doctoral student in marriage and family therapy. And so like I just started binging the news like crazy, talking to as many people as I could. At the time, I was teaching full-time at St. Cloud State. So I was a clinical director and an assistant professor in the marriage and family therapy program. But graduate faculty would always teach at least one course in the undergraduate program, and I would teach the multicultural course. And, you know, so I was paying attention to the undergraduate body, and I'm walking through like the student center the first week of classes, and all the booths and all the clubs have their booths out. And St. Cloud State is like super liberal campus, like very, very.
That's kind of surprising.
It is surprising because it's a super liberal campus smack dab in the middle of a super conservative town.
Right.
And so like there's
northern Minnesota.
Yeah, it's like St. Cloud's an hour north of the Twin Cities of Minneapolis. So it's a deep red county.
Feels like way further.
It could, yeah. When you're out there, you're out there.
Yeah.
And you know, so that was always an interesting dynamic with the campus, but like I knew that was the politics of the university. And so I see like these two young white dudes in a like young college Republicans booth wearing MAGA hats. And like, I see them and I stop and I was like, are you guys crazy? Like I immediately became worried for them. And immediately they had they were exchange students from Norway who just like hated socialism.
That's so random.
Yeah. And like, that's why they were, and they said there wasn't a Young Republicans Club. Like they started it because part of why they wanted to come study in America was to learn more about capitalism.
Interesting.
And so naturally, you know, the Republican Party at the time was like, you know, the party that was more about capitalism. And so they had no idea of like the turmoil of Trump. You know, it's like they just wanted to, they were excited about the Republican Party and conservative politics and again, capitalism. But I was right to be worried for him because the student body turned on him pretty quick. You know, and there was one evening where they were just trying to recruit at their booth, and it was like 200 students like cornered, like there was a huge gathering of students and they were kind of blocked into a corner like in their booth, and everyone was live streaming it, and like these two kids were crying, like they were crying and just trying to get out of there. But like and there were like faculty in there too, like faculty were like egging on the students who were like being pretty aggressive, I would say. And so I reached out to these kids again, and I brought them into my undergrad course to humanize them, because it was a pretty sizable undergrad course, and it was required. It was a required curriculum for like a gen ed elective or whatnot. And so I just started having conversations with them publicly, and then I started facilitating conversations between them and their peers who were left-leaning. And so every time that I did that, it's like after the first time I did it, they all exchanged numbers and like just decided they would hang out because they wanted to keep having those conversations. And so I really did just kind of become obsessed with political polarization and understanding the systemic dynamics that are driving the political conflict that we're experiencing today, because it is distinct. You know, like what's been going on since 2016, it's like we're not more proportionately, it's like there are just as many Democrats as there are Republicans. But what's been different since 2016 has been a massive rise in partisan antipathy, which means that if I'm conservative, I experience far more antipathy toward Democrats than in times past. And antipathy is just negative
feelings.
Yeah, negative feelings, negative thoughts. And so it's starting to see the other party as the enemy, you know? And so like that's alarming to me, because as I was putting this in context of really digging into world history, it's like that seemed to be the beginning of every major empire's fall, is when they started to turn against each other from within. And the reason that empires have done that over time is because it's like when you're the empire, for as long as empires, you know, remain as empires, it's like they kind of get bored.
Well, you don't have like another common enemy or like a common,
And what we know about culture is that, you know, our cultural worldviews almost organize around opposition to an opposite.
Sure.
Or to a threat to it.
Well, yeah, it like brings us together.
It can. It certainly can. And so like that's what we saw after 9/11. You know, like there's an incredible amount of togetherness because Americans got to unite against the enemy, which were, you know, the terrorists, the groups labeled as terrorist groups. But since 9/11, you know, because there hasn't been a terrorist attack on soil, there's been a whole lot of domestic terrorist attacks on soil, which is kind of the point that I'm making is it's problematic, it's concerning, but it's also not new to human systems.
So this is not a political podcast. However, we're bringing this topic in because it is affecting our therapy sessions. Like literally just this morning, I had a therapy session with a client who is non-binary and they're in a relationship with a trans woman. And they come from a super small town, Wisconsin. And they like are really struggling with like maintaining relationships with the people that they grew up with or that they knew, because like some people have been very open and accepting, and like, or even if they're not, you know, accepting, they're able to still have like conversations with them, able to still, you know, have some respect there, but others have absolutely not been able to. And so that experience that they were having, or that they've been having recently, kind of led us to talking about just like the political atmosphere and how are you feeling right now about all of this stuff that's happening? How are you? I mean, it's an election year. How are we managing our political anxiety? How are we managing, these relationships that we have? Because it's so easy to alienate one another, to turn on one another, to feel like I'm right and you're wrong. And it feels so much more emotional, I think, during an election year too. And so, oh my gosh, like it's one of those things that you can kind of process with a client. But I mean, what are you seeing? How do you normally approach this with clients?
Head on.
Yeah.
And so seeing clients through COVID was almost every client was talking about whether it was the politics of COVID, or that being Trump's first term, and then that leak going right into the 2020 election, which was a highly contentious election. There were a lot of marriages that dissolved, because of the political divide, largely. Marriages that were able to find a way through it, despite having opposing political differences. But I would make it clear to every client at intake that we can talk about politics here. And I would say my clients who were very obviously conservative, they would probably assume that I was conservative. My clients who were very obviously liberal, they might very well assume that I'm liberal. And the couples I worked with who represented either side of it were convinced that I hated both parties, and they were the ones who were correct. And so, I really don't have what makes this interesting.
Well, so that's key, though. I want to just stop right there.
Yeah, it makes it easier
because I think that that's the goal. We don't want to. Maybe you'll disagree with me, but in my mind, I, as a therapist, don't want my client to come in and I don't want to be so obvious about my views or my worldview or how I feel about certain things that would make them feel like they must be this way or they must be that way. Because I talked about my non-binary client. I also have conservative clients that are from very conservative families, and I'm able to engage them in the same conversation. I mean, I think that that's maybe where I want to start in this conversation, where do we as therapists want to show up kind of as a blank slate and just reflect back to our clients? How do we show up in this way? That's how I've been doing it. And so that's where I'm trying to...
It's something we need to be super intentional about, and we need to know where we're at with it. For me, it is easier because organically, I don't... both parties are deeply flawed. The media on both ends of it is deeply flawed. Neither of them, that doesn't mean they're equally flawed, but it's neither of them have done anything to earn my allegiance, I guess I would say. Yep. And so for me, and I'm so much more fascinated by the polarization that if I, chose one side over the other, I would worry that my life would become boring. And, so it's easy for me to kind of adapt, but in doing that, I wouldn't say it's being a blank slate as much as it's being adaptive to what that client needs from you. Yeah. But oftentimes what the client doesn't need from you is affirmation of their political beliefs. It's they already know what they believe, and it's we don't need to affirm that for them by making it clear that we agree with them. Yep. And in general, I would say even that notion of I'd be cautious about agreeing with them too much, especially when you really do agree with them, because, what if they need some of their viewpoints to be challenged? And if they're struggling with relationships with people that have opposing viewpoints, it's if you're too aligned with them and that's too explicit, it's can therapy then be a venue where they can learn how to be in dialogue and relationship with people that don't agree with them, And so the more maybe mysterious, and I would kind of say, I said earlier, the clients might very well assume that I'm liberal if they were liberal, but they wouldn't be able to say that with certainty. And so there was some,
it's not
to leave some mystery.
It's not like they would say, well, Lucas said, I was talking about how I was at a Pride event and Lucas said that he was really proud of me. You know what I mean? There's not, it's not like
or my therapist is a liberal. Yeah, my therapist hates Trump. My therapist hates Biden.
It's not like you're saying things that are, you're not self-disclosing any of that sort of stuff. Yeah. let's go back to kind of like just politics in general, where if a client is asking you questions about how you might feel about something. I mean, I know plenty of therapists, mostly whom are psychologists, that would be like, why is that question important to
Definitely
you?
psychologists.
Yeah. But you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like they would be, a client would say, hey, Lucas, who did you vote for in the last election? And then, if you were a psychologist, this is such a broad thing. I know plenty of therapists that would say, oh, well, why is that important to you? Or like, why is it important to you that I know that? And then it's just, I know that that's just a normal response that some therapists will give. But how do you respond if somebody is asking you a point blank?
That was easy in 2016 because I voted for Gary Johnson.
Gary Johnson.
Yeah.
I haven't thought
It was
about
a
him in a
cop-out
while.
vote.
That is,
It was a total cop-out vote, and I didn't do it for purposes of clinical practice, but it did end up coming in really, it was handy to be able to, especially when I was working with couples on either side, to let them know that the Libertarian Party, I would say it's the closest thing to purple. Like, it's not a true purple party, Libertarian, but it is the balance of like fiscal responsibility and small government, which is very conservative, and just like individual liberty, like be free, which is very socially progressive, and so it's like you're aligning with both sides on the things that they seem to care about most. Libertarianism is just like the actual party is just, it's not a super functional party as it plays out in American politics.
So if I was like a brand new therapist and I was going into just starting this summer, even as the election kind of starts to boil a little bit or simmer, like, how would you recommend that I navigate some of these conversations with clients?
I would what's important to do is, and this is work we do in our personal lives, we have to find a way to, I would say, spend some time differentiating from the polarization and being able to take a step back and examine it as like two interacting parts that we are temporarily in a role of observing rather than actively participating. And we also need to know exactly where we're at with our own political leanings, because the more those align with one end of the spectrum, the more problematic it can be. Like, it's not inherently problematic like you could be super far right, super far left and still be an effective therapist. You could also be super far left, super far right, not pay much attention to that and be unaware of how ineffective and unethical you might be practicing as a therapist. Because what we can't do is utilize our position and platform as the therapist, which there is a power differential. We can't use that platform to preach our own politics onto clients. And we also, that also gets tricky just in general of how we preach politics publicly. Even if we're in the role of, like, if we're slapping our credentials at the end of it, it's like, that's fair game for the regulatory board then. And so it's like, we can't impose our own cultural beliefs onto client systems because it's unfair. We exert an influence that other people in their lives don't. And so when I say like taking a step back, it's like, do you understand what's happening? Like, that's an important question to ask yourself. Do I get how we got here? What's really driving this polarization? Because if your answer to that question is, well, it's because that party's all bad and my party's all good, it's like, I would say, it's like it's more complex than that.
Yep.
And so make space for more complexity to come into it. But when, like, ultimately for me, it does come down to just having, like, I appreciate culture and the cultural worldview of each client more than any other aspect of therapy. And I've talked about that in plenty of other podcasts we've done, is how much the client's cultural worldview matters to my clinical practice. And so and that's because through my research in existentialism, world history, the philosophies, and terror management theory, which is a empirical framework coming out of the social sciences, it's just, I'm convinced that our culture is the most powerful, influential facet of our mental health and how we experience our mental health and our relationships, because that's how we earn our togetherness, is by being a part of a shared cultural group. And then we earn self-esteem by being, like, living up to and exceeding the cultural standards and norms of that group. And so, like, your client who grew up in somewhere Wisconsin, which is probably a super deep red county, I would imagine. It's like they're struggling to maintain togetherness with that group that it sounds like they want to maintain togetherness because that's where they're from, and like where we're from is important. It matters. But it's like, how do they earn self-esteem within that system anymore? Because one, what that system seems to be organized around not only is contrary to where their lives have taken them, but have they disclosed they experience them as threatening? Yeah. And that very well could be the case. And so how that question of how do I sustain relationships with them is a really important question. It's a tricky one. And would you say any of your training has equipped you to know how to navigate that with this client?
Well, I think that my approach with this client and with other clients that I've had in similar circumstances is typically to kind of evaluate why is this relationship important to you to hold on to? What are you getting from this relationship? What are they getting from this relationship? And just kind of evaluate it from that sense. But I think that, and this even will go into what I want to talk about later too, is the effect that some of this has had on their mental health and having these disagreements that feel like they're at the core of who they are. And even for a lot of people, their political beliefs are so they're so a part of their identity, or how they perceive the world. And so,
which is another shift in the research.
Sure, interesting. So, but I think that the difficult thing is it's people get so emotional about this, and they get so defensive about this that I think that the conversations that I'm having with my clients are less about you need to, I would never say you need to cut this person out of your life, and more about how are you coping with this? Is this what boundaries need to be drawn? Or what can we be doing to take care of your mental health if this is a relationship you're wanting to hold on to? And I don't know, that's kind of the approach that I've been taking with this particular client. But I think that and I'm not someone who is afraid to talk about politics with clients necessarily, but I think that it is just kind of a tricky situation when you're not me personally, but when a lot of my clients are starting to feel a lot of anxiety, even, and feel like they're being attacked, and even just could be physically harmed. I think that's the hard part.
It is hard. And it's hard because it does come down to our fundamental cultural worldview and the beliefs that we've prescribed to the world that we're living in, and the things that we value, again, to feel good about ourselves.
We as in therapists, or
we as the individual.
People? Yeah.
What meanings have I prescribed? Where do I find my togetherness? And what are the things I value? And because I value them, I've organized my life in a way where, I work toward living up to those values and exceeding them. What you were saying before, of people coming to identify so much more strongly with their politics, that's another one of the shifts that we've seen since 2016 is, it's growing up, I listened to my dad and my uncles just screaming their heads off at each other around political disagreement, because my family was pretty, again, there were conservatives, there were liberals. Looking back, I can make sense of it now. Growing up, it didn't really matter to me. But I was, after an hour of it, they'd be all right, see you next weekend. Good to see you. And it's I thought that was great. I love that. And I was that looks exciting. Maybe that'll be a fun part of being a grown up that I looked forward to.
That's crazy.
Well, we were Chicago Italians.
I know. Our families are so different.
It's just expressive, it was, that was just communication.
Okay. But going back to how I was approaching that with the client, thoughts about, I wasn't really touching the subject necessarily. I was talking about how it's affecting them. And that was more of where I was kind of targeting. And I felt like that was helpful. But at the same time, I felt like I was still kind of skirting.
It sounds like they made it clear that they are looking to find a way to sustain their connections with these And so like, as soon as a client identifies that as a goal,
Yeah.
it's like, that's what I'm working with them on behalf of.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and that would be an easy one for me to do because that is something that aligns with my understanding of health, which is where we come from, carries a significant influence over how we experience the world from there on out. And the healthier the relationship is to all the aspects of where we come from, the more mental health we're going to experience, throughout our lifespan. And so,
wait, say that again. I don't understand what you just said. Say that again.
So, like, if I feel really good about where I came from, my culture, my community, I still have friendships and lifelong relationships from the people that were kind of part of my origin and my formative years of development. It
improves your self-esteem.
It improves my self-esteem. It elongates my sense of togetherness that I feel, and it makes mental health come a bit easier. And that's relative to the strains that come along with the opposite of everything I just described. Like when there's a lot of emotional cutoff from your origin, when there's shame around where you come from, like those are things that we'll carry with us for the rest of our life. And so like I think they have a worthy goal. And so some of the questions that I would ask them, would be like, okay, so tell me what it was like growing up with this person. Like get a really good sense of the positive qualities of the relationship that are meaningful to them. Because we're expanding the complexity of who this individual is.
You're humanizing them.
Yeah, you're humanizing them again. And, I'd ask questions like, so how would you describe this person outside of their politics? Like, what else are they? It's like they're a Republican, and it's like they align with these stances, but like, what else? Is there more to them than that? Are there things, and then they'll typically identify things that are larger and more meaningful, than what their politics are. And so, like getting to the universality of, human sameness, and what makes us the same as humans, I would say that's a worthy pursuit, to try to have dialogue that gets people back in touch with that. But then it's also like, I do think there's and I'd ask them the same questions too. It's like, who are you outside of your politics? That question is getting increased. That question was a lot easier for people to answer, a decade ago than it is now. And also with the younger generation, which I now understand is you and not me. It's like you all grew up with more of a like front row seat into the corruption of the political world. Like it's just more on your radar because it was showing up in social media. Like it's like my kids when they were in elementary school, they were coming back talking about politics. Like my son in like 4th grade would be like, so-and-so's dad said Joe Biden's a criminal, a crook. And it's like, what? It's like, why is he oh my gosh.
Reminder that your kids repeat what you say.
Yeah. Which, I'm sure that dad was just fine with. I didn't know the guy. So it didn't, it didn't shock me. But it's. And so there is that aspect of like who we are, and it can be more closely tied to politics, but it shouldn't, like if the more that our political identity constitutes our felt sense of who we are, on either end of the aisle, that's problematic because the political world is an inherently corrupt landscape.
Yeah.
Like it's not a righteous, healthy, rejuvenating, fulfilling landscape. It's horrible. And that's what's problematic about government. I mean, the corruption is rampant on both sides. And it's like one of those things where it's like it's like you might want to set out, for a career in politics to make it better. But in order to get elected into a position where you can have that influence, you need to play by the rules of the game, which is corruption. And before you know it, it's like the people just become the system.
Okay, wait a second. So let me pause you right here because so what you're saying is, like when you're working with clients, you're trying to help humanize the other side. You're trying to help like also
not the whole other side, the individual. The people specifically.
Yes. Okay. You're trying to humanize the people that they know that maybe have different beliefs from them, but then also trying to, kind of help them see that they are their own selves outside of politics as well. And they don't necessarily want to just completely, let that identity envelop them, their political.
Which is what's been happening.
Sure. And then I think that the other piece though that I can hear people screaming this from their car speakers as they're listening to this, but like, what about when it, like, I hear this all the time where it's like, oh, it's a privilege to not pay attention. Oh, it's a privilege to be able to take a step back
Sure.
from politics or the news or, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on, like, for some people, they feel like they have to consume this all the time. They have to let this be a part of their identity. They have, like, it's a matter of life and death.
Yeah.
So for people that are in that situation, if you had a client that was in that situation, would you want them to be able to, like, how would you help them, like, take that hat off or, like...
And I would never, like, I wouldn't say the answer is to, like, just close your eyes to it and shut off from it and ignore it and carry on with your life. Because, like, fact of the matter is, there are people who are in positions where some of the things going around legislatively have a direct, immediate impact on their life. Like, it's something that you can't just ignore.
Yep.
And so that's, paying attention. I still pay attention, but how I pay attention looks much differently. Because how I was paying attention in 2016 through 2019 was, walking into my office, which I spent, like, a lot of time at during COVID because it was just a single office and I had access to it. And, I'd walk in and I'd say, Alexa, turn on CNN, or Alexa, put on, like, POTUS, like, whatever I wanted to listen to in that moment. And I was just constantly consuming media.
But we've even talked about how you felt like that was bad for your mental health.
It was, like, I refer to that as my era of political hysteria.
Well, so, like, I think a lot of people can relate to that because it feels like we have to be so informed. It feels like we have to know what's happening with our political side, with your political side, with your mom's political side. Like, you have to know what's going on at all times because you don't want to look stupid when you're having conversations with people. But then you also feel like it's your duty to know what's going on. And I think that so many people are experiencing this burnout from the politics.
And, like, we can't, and we're worried about that happening again as we're going into another election cycle.
Yes.
It's like, is it going to consume me again? Do I need to let it? But, and, like, if I don't get consumed by it, like, is it a cop out?
Yeah.
It's like, do I feel shame because maybe I do have some privilege to blind myself to it? Like, if I totally close my eyes to politics 100, like, entirely, I don't think it would change much in my day-to-day experience of life.
Sure. And I mean, and I have so many clients who, like, there is active legislation that is getting rolled out that will have a direct effect on their lives. Yeah. And so, like, I think that what I'm running into right now is even just helping clients navigate and know when to shut things off, how to balance some of that, and that's the hard part.
It's why are you consuming this information? Why is it important to you? Why does it matter? And then it's what information are you consuming? And so it's like, what are your sources? Because sources have a lot to do with it. So, and maybe I'll just mention this quickly because this was relevant and super helpful for me. One of the first things I did, and this was after Trump got elected, was I did a 12-month qualitative study where I, in 3-month intervals, I would do nothing but watch Fox News or do nothing but take in CNN. And so it'd be Fox News for 3 straight months. Like, it pretty much almost every night, one of the primetime shows, as much as I could Monday through Friday, even, like, during the day sometimes while I was doing some work just on the radio. And I would just journal and reflect on just what was going on emotionally, the takeaways and whatnot, and just my experience of that media and how it showed up in my day-to-day life.
You're such a researcher.
I know. Well, yeah, I know. Like,
Who does this?
Well, I was a professor, so like, that was my job.
Got it.
To be maintaining some active body. So I was doing this with a grad assistant.
Okay.
And so, like, she and I did a lot of the qualitative analysis of my journaling. And what I found was, like, if you're exclusively taking in one media source, not only are you going to you might be misinformed, you're definitely underinformed, but you're emotionally manipulated. All media outlets do emotionally exploit their base by knowing exactly what to do and say. They do it, it's like, that's similar, across CNN and Fox News, but also Fox News and CNN, they were two very different networks with two very different methods. And what was and what that helped me do is empathize with, so like if someone tells me they're a Trumpster, it's like, okay, like I'm curious about what their media is. And if they say that they really only listen to, like Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson on Fox News, I have a very good sense of what information they've been ingesting, which helps me understand why they think what they think. And I can look back and recall that in those months that I was just ingesting Fox News, I was about it. Like I felt it affecting me of being like, oh my gosh, this is an outrage.
But to be fair, spending every night watching some kind of media would also be draining.
Oh, it's horrible. That's what I'm saying. Like none of it was good.
No.
Like none of it was healthy.
No.
So like I too, like me and my partner now, we've had explicit conversations of how are we going to intake media through this election cycle? And so like what we've come to terms with is, and this is what I recommend to a lot of people, it's like, because it's important to stay up to date, to be informed, to know what's relevant and what's happening. And a really great way to do that is, to just listen to Seth Meyers do his, monologue for 15 minutes every night. Like they're gonna, or like the comedians. It's like, it's good information. It's relevant information, but it's hilarious. Even when it's about something that's really sad and awful and horrible, it's like bringing some humor into it can be helpful. But then what I think is most important about it is like, it's just the high level summaries and it's over. It's like the daily podcast. Like I love that podcast
So does
because
Paul.
it's so informative of something super relevant, but they're like, 20 minutes? Like they're not.
I've never listened to it.
Yeah, they're not super long. And so like, that's also important to have things where like, it's like a fixed interval. Like I'm going to look to this resource on a daily basis because it's going to be a 20-minute update. And after those 20 minutes, it's done. It's like, I got my update. Maybe if it compels me to dig into it a bit more, I will. And that's the other thing I'll recommend too is reading is always, I found to be less emotionally draining than taking in the media. Because when you're reading, it's like you're prescribing your own emotional affect to it. When you're taking in media, it's like you're
hearing their voice.
They're imposing their emotional affect onto your experience of the information that they're giving you.
Sure.
So like with Fox News, like it was the most pronounced emotion that the thematic analysis came up with was contempt. And that's a very, very unhealthy emotion.
I mean, if you are listening to this podcast and you listen to our Gottman episode, you know that contempt is like the wagon to divorce.
Oh, yeah. So number one predictor of a relationship falling to emotional cutoff, and just
interesting. I mean,
dissolving.
But that's interesting that was what you got from Fox News. What did you get from CNN?
Like hamster wheel of outrage that never got me anywhere. It was like with CNN, every single tweet was the worst thing that's ever happened in the history of America. But yesterday's tweet was nothing compared to today's. And then, it's like Friday's tweet, whew. And then it's like, okay, it's like, so what, like, we became desensitized, so what's bad?
Yeah.
Like when everything's a catastrophe, nothing is a catastrophe.
Well, and it feels like, oh my word, just having this conversation, it feels heavy.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not a heavy conversation, but you know what I mean? Like, but it feels like, I mean, politics can just feel heavy. When you are immersed in like something for more than 20 minutes a day, or if you are like really taking in information from any news source, like, I mean, it can feel so, I don't know, like either numbing or it can feel like overwhelming. Like there's nothing I can do in the world. Like I feel as lost. I feel so lost. There's nothing
And that's why it can be
hopeless. That's the word I was looking for.
The more that our identities are constituted by our political leanings, a huge aspect of what's so problematic about that is at the end of the day, it's like we're not, I would never say we're powerless, but it's like, I can't wake up tomorrow and go make political change.
Yeah.
It's like as an individual, it's like, everything goes through legislation, and it's like, that's a tedious, clunky, super corrupt process.
Well, and what you're saying is actually even reminding me of other conversations I've had with clients. And this is like such a therapist thing to do, but just talking about like, what can you control? what can you not control? Because I think that political anxiety is one of those things that like it does leave you feeling hopeless at times. You feel helpless, you feel hopeless. Maybe that's more of like political depression. But I think that focusing on what you can and can't control and letting some of your outrage or letting some of your emotions spur you to some action can be helpful.
It can be, but not if that action is convincing my dad that he's wrong.
Well,
or making, insisting that my best friend that I grew up with comes to understand how wrong they are and how right I am.
Well,
like, that's not the change that we should be investing in.
No, and that's not even, that's not the goal, because the goal
But that's what we fall into.
Sure. I mean, my response to that would be, I mean, like, how do you know that you're the right one and that they're the wrong one, first off? And then also, like, how are you still investing in this relationship? How are you can control how you react. You can't control how they react. Like, I mean, again, very high level therapist things, but.
And so like, I just had a flashback to a session with a couple who are on total opposite ends of the spectrum. And so
are they still married?
Yeah.
Oh, they are. That's good.
They are. They ended up bringing in their in-laws. They all came in. Like, the whole system came in for an intervention around politics, because it was one partner, and their other partner's family was like all politically aligned. And then it was just the one partner whose family was all out of state. And so like every gathering was like MAGA fest, and like they were the one liberal. And everyone knew it, and so like it was painful for them. It was difficult. So like we had to address the issue head on. But like what I would say to them at various points when it's just the two of them was like, so what I'm hearing from you is like, you're certain that you're correct in your stance and your belief, and your partner's wrong. It's like, what I'm hearing from you is you're certain that you're right and they're actually wrong. It's like, and isn't that interesting? It's like, how can that even happen? How can that be where you're both so certain that you're right and the other person's wrong, to the point where you think they're a bad person? But it's like, did you think they were a bad person 3 years ago? Or like, who was this person to you 3 years ago? Before like the politics really started to get in the way. And so humility is an aspect of it, but again, like it's tricky. Don't underestimate the significance of being able to practice empathy by being able to take a step back and be curious about where is their information coming from.
Well, and I think there's also a layer of acceptance that needs to happen too, where like you need to be able to accept that maybe you are not going to agree on everything, or maybe you need to accept that there's, I don't know, I think that if this is a relationship that's important to you, then there needs to be some acceptance here.
And are you so sure that you want to agree with everything? It's like, what does that do to a relationship?
Yeah.
If there is no variance of opinion or
so
viewpoint,
true.
It's like
true.
That can stale a relationship pretty quick. And so, yeah, I mean, this stuff, it's hard to know like exactly where to go with these conversations, because again, if we had 10 hours, I'd be a lot more relaxed about it and less pressure.
Are you feeling tense?
No, I'm not feeling tense. I just I know that there are things I want to make sure that we get to and we address.
Well, we'll just have a part 2.
Oh yeah, we could always
because we're out of time.
Oh, we are out of time?
We are.
Oh, what time is it?
It's 4:02.
Oh, it's 50 minutes. All right, let me just kind of give some, I think the big things are, it's like what I think is important to remain mindful of is, and this is a teaching from world history and even U.S. history, is every single generation of humans has had their shit that they needed to deal with. It's like civil rights movement, the counterculture movement, all the various social revolutions that we've been through. It's like this is just ours. Like, this is our shit for us to deal with in this era of human evolution, and so it's like, keep that in mind, that it's not new. Like the how it's manifesting and the particulars of it is new, and so that's why it can be problematic to get too lost in the specifics. So take a step back and, remember that, again, this is something that every era of humans has dealt with. But one of the biggest takeaways I took away from digging through world history is world history is a constant story of progress. We've never not continued to progress socially, primarily socially. Like we've become an increasingly socially progressive society, and there has always been a kind of like a resistance to that. Like that's not new either. The fact that there's resistance to social progress, that's not new. There's nothing unique or distinct about that. It's like we're just in the place of being the grown-ups who feel like we can do something about it. And on that note, it's like be mindful of what it is that you're setting out to do. And an important question that I think people forget to ask themselves is, so like say there is a person in your life that you care about, but like they're, say you're a liberal and they're just getting sucked deep into right-wing politics and you're having a hard time, having a relationship with them. It's like, what do you ultimately want to do? And if what you ultimately want to do is to like help them see like beyond the viewpoint that maybe they've been, exploited into or that they've kind of fallen into, it's like, what's going to be effective in doing that? Because beating them over the head with your politics is not effective. That's not going to be effective. And so in a lot of, like more like social, on either end of the aisle here, it's like, what do you care more about? The other person telling you that you're right or being effective in addressing the strains in the relationship with this person that you're trying to improve? And, it's asking it's hard for if you feel like these situations get really combative, ask questions. Like it's really hard for people to be defensive when you're asking them questions. And if people have like a crazy worldview or like political stance on something that makes no sense, the more questions you ask them about it, the more effective you're going to be in helping them realize that maybe they don't even really know what they're talking about because they can't even answer these simple questions. But when you're not answering questions and you're just telling them that they're dumb or bad, or like you're a horrible person because you think this, it's like that's just going to push them deeper into that stance, into that position. And so it's like people find togetherness through like-mindedness, and so like if there's somebody who's on the opposite end of the aisle and they have community in that, it's like take the fact seriously that like you're asking them to maybe step out of that community or abandon it, which is again ultimately not that shouldn't be the goal necessarily. But it's like, dude, are there qualities and aspects to this relationship, to this person, to me that are bigger than my politics? Like, do I value family more than I value my political party? That's an important question for people to ask themselves and for you to ask other people too. It's like, you disagree with everything I'm saying. Do you care more about the disagreement than you care about having a relationship with me? And like with parents having a hard time accepting, their kids who are maybe more progressive, that's an important one for them. But like in general, learn about the individual's worldview, be curious about how they got there and they came to have this worldview. And the most advanced, sophisticated trick to empathy, I would say, is if you're really struggling to understand why someone you care about can think what they think, to go through that process of recreating your entire upbringing to see yourself as them. To see yourself as somebody who, if you had a different circumstance or upbringing, you very well could be on the same side of this issue as that person is.
Yeah.
And just kind of humble yourself to that.
That's really good advice.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's going to suck. There's an inherent component of that.
Whoa. You gave me a little bit of hope, and then you just said that.
I know. I'm an existentialist. I have this thing about hope where, like, it's so important, but, like, it always needs to be accompanied by despair.
By despair.
Not despair necessarily, but we need to the more we can make space for the inescapable, like, negative aspects of experience, the more we can enjoy the things that are good about it and positive. We can't deny the negatives.
No,
we just have to embrace and accept the fact that part of this is going to be difficult and rough and shitty and not feel good, and we might not get what we want. But, this is what we're also investing in that's meaningful and purposeful. So, I mean, I want everyone to get along. That's kind of a thing I've always had. Like, I just want I want everyone to have happy, fulfilling, meaningful relationships, especially with their family. It hurts my heart to know how many families have cut off from each other because of politics. I just think that's so unfortunate. And it enrages me because I know how much the media has played a part in that. Yeah. And like, it's sad. It's really sad. how many relationships have been spoiled over this. And so we need to be smarter. We need to
ask better questions,
be humble, remember our own humanity, remember the humanity in others. And there was a time when, we were all Americans. That used to really matter. And it still could. But even beyond that, I think the most important thing to always keep in mind is that we're all humans.
Yeah. Well, on that note, thank you for joining, Lucas.
Well, yeah, I was just working in the quarry.
I appreciate being able to pull you in for this conversation.
Thanks, Parker.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, hopefully
Godspeed.
Thank you. Hopefully everyone's, political season goes smoothly and that this has better equipped you for conversations with clients and family and friends and hopefully just given you some more to think about. So see you next week.